It all started on a chilly winter night, the kind where the air bites at your skin and the silence feels heavier than usual. I had just finished rearranging the guest room for my sister, who was visiting with her family. The house was already bursting at the seams with laughter and noise, the way it always is when the family gets together. But that night, the sleeping arrangements didn't go as planned. My nephew Michael, who's 18 and a college freshman, had no place to sleep. The couch was taken, and every room was full. "Don't worry about it," I told my sister when she fretted over the lack of space. "Michael can share the bed in my room. It's no big deal." She hesitated for a moment but agreed. Michael shrugged like it didn't matter to him, grabbed his pillow, and followed me upstairs. Michael had always been polite and reserved, one of those kids who blends into the background during family gatherings. That night, as he settled on one side of the bed, I remember thinking how much he had grown. Gone was the boy who used to chase his cousins around the yard. In his place was a young man trying to find his place in the world. We chatted for a bit about his college life, his favorite classes, and his plans for the future. He seemed more relaxed than I'd ever seen him before, maybe because he finally had someone listening. Before long, the room fell quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of blankets and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. But then something unexpected happened. Just as I was drifting into sleep, I felt Michael shift beside me. At first, I thought he was just trying to get comfortable, but then his movements became deliberate. I froze, unsure of what to do or how to react. My mind raced, torn between disbelief and confusion. I wanted to believe it was nothing, just a misunderstanding, but my instincts told me otherwise. My heart pounded as I stared into the darkness, wondering what would happen next. Was I overthinking it? Or was this something I could no longer ignore? I lay there in the darkness, my mind tangled in a web of questions and emotions. Was I imagining things? Could it be that Michael was just restless, unaware of how his movements came across? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the uneasy feeling gnawed at me, refusing to let me rest. Michael's breathing was steady, almost rhythmic, as if he was already asleep. I tried to match his calmness, to convince myself that there was nothing to worry about, but the air in the room felt heavy, and every small sound seemed amplified: the creak of the mattress, the faint whistle of the wind outside the window. I thought back to earlier that evening, replaying every detail of the day. Michael had been his usual quiet self, polite and reserved. He had helped clear the dishes after dinner and even laughed at my brother's bad jokes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but now, as I stared at the ceiling, doubt began to creep in. Michael and I had always shared a friendly bond, though we were never particularly close. He had spent summers at our house as a kid, running around with his cousins and begging for one more round of hide and seek before bedtime. Those memories felt distant now, replaced by the awkwardness of him growing up and finding his own identity. I wondered if I had missed something, a subtle change in his behavior, a moment that should have stood out but didn't. It's strange how we sometimes overlook the little things until they're staring us in the face. I felt torn between wanting to protect the trust we had and the unease bubbling inside me. The clock on the wall ticked louder in my ears as the minutes dragged on. I thought about waking Michael up, making some excuse about needing space, but part of me hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I said or did something that would damage our relationship forever? As these thoughts swirled in my mind, I realized how much I valued the peace within our family. The last thing I wanted was to create unnecessary tension or misunderstandings. But ignoring what I felt wasn't an option either. I needed to figure out the truth, but how? The room remained silent, but my heart raced as if it were carrying the weight of an unspoken secret. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, and whatever it was, it wouldn't stay hidden for long. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. The house was already alive with chatter as the family gathered for breakfast. Michael was gone from the bed, and for a moment I wondered if the strange tension I'd felt the night before had been nothing more than a dream. But as I walked downstairs, my eyes instinctively searched for him. He was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, his expression as neutral as ever. Nothing about him seemed unusual, but I couldn't shake the unease lingering in my chest. Throughout breakfast, I tried to focus on the conversation around me, plans for the day, family jokes, and my sister's endless stories about her kids. Michael barely spoke, only nodding occasionally when someone addressed him. Was this his usual quiet demeanor, or was there something more? Every glance in his direction felt like an attempt to decipher an unreadable book. After breakfast, the day went on as planned. The family decided to spend the afternoon at the park, and I found myself surrounded by the noise of kids running around and adults sharing stories. Michael stayed on the outskirts, headphones in, watching everyone from a distance. I couldn't help but watch him, trying to pick up on anything that might give me clarity. It wasn't until later, when we were back at the house, that I had a chance to speak with him one-on-one. He was in the living room, flipping through channels, when I decided to sit down next to him. "How's school going?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "It's fine," he replied without looking at me. His short response left little room for conversation, but I wasn't ready to let it go. "You seem quiet today. Is everything okay?" For a moment he hesitated, as if weighing his words. Then he turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess?" I nodded, but his response left me with more questions than answers. Was he hiding something, or was I reading too much into nothing? As the evening approached, the weight of the unanswered questions grew heavier. I tried to focus on the present, but my thoughts kept circling back to that night, to the feeling that something was just slightly off. That night, the house finally grew quiet after a long day of family chaos. Everyone had retired to their rooms, and I found myself once again sharing the space with Michael. The uneasiness from the night before lingered, though I tried to push it to the back of my mind. "It's probably nothing," I told myself. He seemed perfectly normal all day. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the tension in the air felt palpable, almost like an invisible weight pressing down on me. Michael came into the room with his phone in hand, his face illuminated by its soft glow. He didn't say much, just muttered a quick good night before sliding into bed. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, trying to read his body language. He looked calm, maybe even tired, but I couldn't help but feel like there was more beneath the surface. As the minutes stretched into hours, I found it impossible to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind outside seemed amplified in the stillness of the room. I lay on my side, staring at the faint outline of the bedside lamp, my thoughts spinning. Was I being overly cautious, maybe even paranoid? And then, just as my eyes started to grow heavy, I felt it again, movement. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it was enough to jolt me fully awake. My pulse quickened, my senses suddenly on high alert. I didn't move, didn't say a word, hoping to convince myself it was just Michael shifting in his sleep. But then it happened again. This time, it wasn't just a movement. It was deliberate. I could feel him leaning closer, the mattress dipping slightly beneath his weight. My breath caught in my throat as every muscle in my body tensed. I didn't know what to do, whether to confront him or pretend to stay asleep. The silence in the room felt deafening, broken only by the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I could feel the tension radiating between us, thick and almost suffocating. My mind raced with questions and doubts, but one thing was clear. This moment was a turning point. Whatever happened next would change everything. I just didn't know how. I stayed perfectly still, my mind racing as the tension in the room became unbearable. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I didn't know what to do. Should I turn on the light, speak up, or just pretend none of this was happening? Every option felt impossible, and I was trapped in the weight of indecision. But then something unexpected happened. Michael pulled back, retreating to his side of the bed. It was as though he'd hesitated, caught himself in the middle of whatever he was about to do. The mattress stilled, and his breathing evened out again. I could feel the space between us grow wider, but my thoughts remained tangled. For the rest of the night, I barely slept, my mind replaying every moment, every second of what had just occurred. When morning finally came, I got up quickly, not wanting to linger in the room. I needed space, air, time to think about what had just happened. I busied myself in the kitchen, cleaning up from breakfast long after everyone had left the table. Michael stayed distant all day, avoiding eye contact and sticking close to his phone. He wasn't just quiet, he was different, like he was carrying a weight he couldn't share. His demeanor only added to my unease. Did he know that I had noticed last night? Was this his way of avoiding a confrontation? As the day wore on, my sister came into the kitchen, her voice breaking my train of thought. "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, her tone light but curious. "What is it?" I asked, trying to sound normal. "Have you noticed Michael acting strange?" she asked, her brow furrowing slightly. Her question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. "What do you mean?" "He's been really quiet lately," she said. "Not just here, at home too. I thought maybe he'd open up more during this trip, but he seems so withdrawn." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. At least I wasn't imagining things. "Yeah, I've noticed he's been a bit off," I said carefully. She sighed, leaning against the counter. "I just hope he's okay. Maybe it's school stress or something. You know how teenagers can be." Her words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Was I misreading everything? Could it all just be the stress of a young adult adjusting to life? But even as I considered the possibility, a gnawing feeling told me it wasn't that simple. Later that evening, as everyone gathered in the living room for a family game night, the atmosphere felt lighter. Laughter echoed through the house, and for a moment, the tension seemed to fade. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught Michael watching me. It wasn't the casual glance of someone engaged in the room. It was something else, something that sent a chill down my spine. I excused myself early, retreating to my room in search of solitude. But as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm hadn't even begun. Something was brewing, something I couldn't yet see, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. That night, I sat alone in the room, the silence pressing against me like a heavy blanket. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the tension with Michael. Whatever was happening needed to be addressed. I replayed every interaction in my mind, questioning if I had misread his actions or if there was something deeper at play. When Michael came into the room, he hesitated at the door, as if debating whether to enter. His usual quiet demeanor now felt laced with unease, and I could tell he sensed the growing divide between us. Without looking up, I decided to speak, my voice calm but firm. "Michael, can we talk?" He froze, his hand still on the doorknob, before stepping in and closing the door behind him. "About what?" he asked, his tone guarded. I took a deep breath. "About you. About what's been going on. I feel like something's been bothering you, and I want to understand." His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, guilt, maybe both. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his shoulders tense. "It's nothing," he mumbled, but his voice lacked conviction. It doesn't feel like nothing, I said gently. You've been distant, and I can tell you're holding something in. You don't have to keep it to yourself. For a moment, the room was filled with a suffocating silence. Then, to my surprise, his composure cracked. I don't know what's wrong with me, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been feeling lost, like I don't belong anywhere. His words hit me harder than I expected. All this time, I'd been so focused on my unease that I hadn't considered what he might be going through. Michael, it's okay to feel that way, I said. You're not alone, and you don't have to figure it out all at once. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, he said, his voice trembling. I just, I didn't know how to ask for help. In that moment, the tension dissolved, replaced by a deeper understanding. But just as I began to feel relief, Michael added something that sent a chill down my spine. There's something else, he said, something I haven't told anyone. Before I could respond, the bedroom door creaked open slightly, and my sister's voice called out from the hallway. Everything okay in here? Michael and I exchanged a glance, the unspoken truth hanging heavy between us. Whatever he was about to reveal, it wasn't over yet. I turned toward the door where my sister stood, her face framed with concern. Yeah, we're fine, I replied, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. She lingered for a moment, then nodded and closed the door softly, leaving us alone again. Michael sat still, his head bowed, as though the weight of what he was about to say was too much to carry. You can tell me, I said gently. Whatever it is, I'm here for you. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling. I've been scared to talk about it because I didn't want anyone to think I was weak or different. He paused, gathering his thoughts. At school, I've been struggling a lot, not just with classes, but with myself. I've been feeling out of place, like I don't fit anywhere, and it's made me act in ways I'm not proud of. His words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. I realized that the tension I had felt wasn't just about me. It was about his internal battle, one he didn't know how to express. Michael, I said softly, you're going through a lot, and that's okay. It's brave of you to share this. You're not alone, and there's nothing wrong with needing support. He looked at me, his expression filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. I didn't mean to make things weird, he admitted. I just, I didn't know how to handle it all. I nodded, understanding more than I could put into words. You didn't make things weird. I'm glad you told me, and I'll help you, okay? We'll figure this out together. For the first time, Michael's tense shoulders relaxed. The heaviness in the room began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of resolution. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was I. The rest of the night passed peacefully. We didn't dwell on the conversation, but there was an unspoken understanding between us, a new bond built on trust and honesty. As the days went on, Michael opened up more, and I helped him connect with people who could guide him through his struggles. Our family became a stronger support system, offering him the reassurance he needed. Looking back, that night could have driven us apart, but instead it brought us closer. It was a reminder that sometimes what feels like conflict is really a call for connection, a chance to listen and understand. And in those moments, we find the strength to move forward, together. Michael looked at me, his face a mix of hesitation and urgency. There's something I haven't told you, he said quietly. His voice trembled, but his eyes stayed locked on mine, as though seeking reassurance. Before I could respond, the door opened again. My sister stepped in, her expression confused but slightly annoyed. What's going on in here? She asked, glancing between us. Michael froze and I quickly stood up. We were just talking, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She frowned, clearly not convinced. You both seem so tense. Is everything okay? Michael looked at her, his face pale. Mom, I need to say something, he blurted out, his words spilling out faster than he could stop them. The room seemed to shrink as my sister turned her full attention to him. What is it, Michael? She asked, her tone softer now. He hesitated, his hands trembling. I've been hiding something from everyone, and I think it's time to stop. My sister's expression shifted to one of concern. What are you talking about? Michael took a deep breath, visibly steadying himself. At school, I've been getting bullied, he admitted, his voice breaking. It's been going on for months, and I didn't know how to tell anyone. I thought it would stop, but it hasn't. It's just gotten worse. My sister's face fell, and she quickly moved to his side. Michael, why didn't you tell me? You don't have to go through this alone. He shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. I was embarrassed. I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it. I stood quietly, letting them have their moment. But my heart ached for him. Everything started to make sense. The withdrawal, the tension, the way he seemed so distant. As my sister hugged him tightly, I thought the moment had passed, but Michael's next words left me stunned. There's more, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone at school recorded it. One of the worst days. They threatened to share it if I said anything. The air in the room shifted, the weight of his confession sinking in. My sister's face turned pale, and my stomach tightened. This wasn't just about bullying. It was about fear and humiliation on a scale none of us had imagined. In that moment, everything changed. The real fight wasn't just about understanding Michael's pain. It was about helping him reclaim his strength and his voice. And while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, we knew one thing: he wouldn't have to face it alone.